As the satanic panic took hold of the country, one man would reinforce the fear that devil worshippers were out there, waiting to destroy innocent lives. A man who broke into houses, made people swear to Satan, before ending their lives in often brutal ways. When the country got a look at the devil's favorite child, his sinister smile would etch his infamous mark in history. He was Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. Normally I try to avoid covering serial killers if I can. I don't want my videos to be about blood and gore. I don't want them to be about people who don't deserve recognition because of their actions. I want this to be about analyzing crimes and looking at ways we as a society could prevent such things from happening in the future. For me, victims of crime should be remembered, not the perpetrators of crime. But at the same time, the Night Stalker is important to the narrative of the Satanic Panic, and no coverage of the Satanic Panic would be complete without Richard Ramirez. That being said, I am not going to refer to him as the Night Stalker, except for when talking about what the media named him, and I am not going to call him Richard Ramirez. From now on, he is Dick. And that is how I'm going to refer to him from here on out. On February 29th, 1960, the world was cursed when old Dickie's mother gave birth to this walking advertisement for birth control. His mother apparently, according to Wikipedia and a couple of podcasts, was named Mercedes. His father was Julian, and he was once a cop in his native Mexico. But then he crossed the border and settled in El Paso, where Dick was born. And when he was drunk, he was not the nicest man to be around. Probably had to do with the fact that he couldn't handle downsizing from police officer to laborer. He worked for the railroad and had a habit of being prone to anger when drunk. So Dick's idea to get away from him would be to sleep in cemeteries instead of at home, which doesn't make him a goth, it makes him homeless by choice. He also had a cousin he looked up to named Mike. Well, his real name was Miguel, but everyone called him Mike. Mike was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and he came back with a severe lack of humanity. He would boast to his 12-year-old cousin all the war crimes you can imagine, along with photographs. Not going to go into them. Let's just say that you could spin a wheel of war crimes and land on one Mike did. That is how messed up this guy was. Then Mike decided that he should take our favorite smegma stain under his wing and teach him some things. For example, how to kill without being seen. Oh, and when Dick was 13, Mike got pissed at his wife, pulled a gun, and shot her in the face. A crime that really didn't faze old Dickie boy. People like to point out that the reason is Dick had 2 head injuries as a child. At age 2, a dresser fell on his head, which did not succeed in killing him. At 6, he was hit in the head with a swing, knocking him unconscious. These 2 incidents, and probably his father not helping with beating his son, made Dick a little bit of a psychopath. But back to Mike. Mike ended up going to a mental hospital. He was found insane due to PTSD. So we move on to bad influence number 3 if you're counting. His sister's husband, Roberto. Not long after Mike shot his wife, little Dickie ended up moving in with his sister, Ruth. Roberto, Ruth's husband, was a peeping Tom. So Roberto thought the best way to bond with his brother-in-law was to take him out at night to peep through windows. Hell, it seemed to be a family tradition because in 1977, Mike joined them after getting out of the mental hospital. So Dick pretty much had no positive father figures in his life. Hell, when he was 14, he started taking LSD. And when Mike returned to Dick's life, the two would do other drugs. It was when he was around 17 that he ended up getting interested in the occult and Satanism, an interest that would stay with him throughout his pathetic life. While he was a teen, he got a job at a Holiday Inn, where he would use a pass key to break into hotel rooms and steal people's shit. One day, he happened upon a woman still in one of those rooms, and he tried to assault her, which got him an ass kicking when the woman's husband came back to the room. The husband and wife, though, were from out of state, so charges were dropped because they didn't want to come back to Texas to testify. Honestly, if I had been that husband, I would have just gotten a house for the time being, just to make sure this sick freak went to prison. Dick ended up dropping out of school, and at age 22, he ended up moving permanently to California. Rick James once said, "Cocaine is a hell of a drug," and he wasn't lying, because Dick became heavily addicted to cocaine while wandering the streets of both LA and San Francisco. This was the 80s. Cocaine had become a very popular drug and the drug of choice for many abusers. On April 10th, 1984, a 9-year-old girl named May Leung was out with her brother in San Francisco. Her 8-year-old brother and her both had a dollar that they lost and were trying to find it. That is when Dick came across them. He agreed to help them find the dollar, suggesting that May Leung's brother go look in one area while May and Dick looked in the other. This wasn't out of the kindness of his heart. It was because he had planned on killing May, which he did in his apartment that he had at the time in a district called the Tenderloin District. Not really sure why it is called that, but I'm not going to discuss what he did to this 9-year-old girl. Let's just say it was graphic and disturbing, and the reason I don't like this piece of shit. So yes, Dick was a child murderer. This wasn't going to be the last time he attacked a child, but he wasn't linked to this crime until DNA evidence proved that he was a killer in 2009. But in 2016, a second suspect was linked that was not named because the suspect was possibly a juvenile at the time, and any charges were not brought forth due to lack of evidence. But this is pretty much the kickstart of the reign of terror Dick would unleash on California. I'm going to go over the victims of Dick. On June 8, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny Vincow was found in her apartment, having been nearly decapitated. Fingerprints from a mesh on the window linked to Dick. That was his only murder in 1984. On March 17, 1985, 22-year-old Maria Hernandez was shot outside her home with a .22 caliber handgun when she pulled into her garage. She had seen the attack coming and lifted her hands to protect herself. The bullet hit her keys and ricocheted, so she played dead until Dick left. Inside, her roommate wasn't as lucky. 34-year-old Dale Yoshi Okazaki heard the gunshot and hid behind a counter as Dick entered. She peeked out as he was rummaging through the kitchen, and he shot her in the forehead, killing her instantly. On March 27, 1985, in a home that he had burglarized a year earlier, he entered the home of 64-year-old Vincent Charles Zazara and his wife, 44-year-old Maxine. He shot Charles in the head as he slept, again with a .22 caliber handgun. Maxine was awakened where he bound her and demanded her valuables. Maxine told him, and when he was distracted, she broke free, grabbed a shotgun from under the bed, and tried shooting Dick, but the shotgun was unloaded. So he ended up getting overly pissed and shooting her 3 times, then stabbing her a lot more times. And here's a graphic part for you all. He cut out her eyes, stuck them in a jewelry box, and left with that jewelry box. This is where we get the second piece of important evidence. A shoe print from a pair of Avia sneakers in the flower bed. This pair of Avia sneakers would be important later. On May 14, 1985, he broke into the home of 66-year-old Bill Doy and his disabled wife, 56-year-old Lillian. He shot Bill with a .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun when Bill went for his own gun. He then beat Bill unconscious and put thumb cuffs on Lillian. Lillian survived the whole ordeal, but not unscathed. He kinda did things to her. Her husband would end up dying. On May 14, 1985, he broke into the home of 2 sisters, 85-year-old Mabel Bell, also known as Ma, and 81-year-old Florence Lang, known as Nettie. He bludgeoned them both with a hammer he found, tied them up, used electrical cord to shock them back awake, and continued the torture. He then used Bell's lipstick to draw pentagrams on the walls and on Bell's thigh. Both sisters were found 2 days later, surprisingly still alive, but Bell ended up passing away from her injuries. The next day, he drove the same stolen car he had driven the night before to the home of 42-year-old Carol Kyle, who he bound along with her 11-year-old son. He would unbind Carol after directing her son into a closet. He wanted her valuables and told her not to look at him. He ended up leaving after binding Carol and her son in a closet, but Carol was not unscathed, leaving it at that. On July 2nd, 1985, he entered the home of 75-year-old Mary Louise Cannon, where he bludgeoned her and stabbed her in her sleep. On July 5th, he entered the room of 16-year-old Whitney Bennett and beat her with a tire iron. Then he tried to find a knife, which he couldn't find, so he tried strangling her with a phone cord, which sparks from the phone cord startled him, and when she began breathing again, he left, feeling Jesus had saved her. On July 7th, he broke into the home of 60-year-old Joyce Nelson when she was asleep on a couch. He stomped her to death, leaving shoe prints of his Avia sneakers behind. He wasn't done that night either. 63-year-old Sophie Dickman was next. He assaulted her and handcuffed character. He stole all her valuables, and when he demanded if that was all of them, she swore it was, and he made her swear to Satan. On July 20th, Dick purchased a machete, which he used on 66-year-old Leila Needing and her 68-year-old husband Maxon. After he got what he came for, which was all of their valuables, he shot them in the head. Then at 4:18, he entered the home of the Covanth family, which I'm sure I'm going to butcher these names, so please forgive me. He did evil things to some kid Covanth before dragging her around for the valuables. He made her also swear to Satan that he found everything. On August 6th, he entered the home of Chris and Virginia Peterson. He shot Virginia in the face with a .25 caliber handgun. He then shot Chris, who fought back, taking 3 more bullets. Both lived. And here's more names I'm going to butcher. August 8th, he shot 31-year-old Elias Abawath while he slept. His wife, 27-year-old Sakina, he brutally assaulted, making her swear to Satan that she wouldn't scream. The couple's 3-year-old entered the room. Dick decided to tie up the 3-year-old boy and continued his assault before leaving. After this, he left LA after the media coverage became really high. He went to San Francisco, where he entered the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He killed Peter while he slept. Then after he had his way with Barbara, he shot her and left her for dead, but she ended up living. He also drew the phrase "Jack the Knife" on the walls in lipstick. His shoe print was also found at the scene. This would be the last scene that these shoe prints would be found at. I will talk more about that later. But he returned to LA on August 24th, and he almost got caught. He decided to break into the home of James Romero Jr. James heard a noise outside and went to investigate. When he saw nothing, he ended up going to bed after working on a mini bike for a bit. His son, 13-year-old James III, saw Dick sneaking around outside his bedroom window. James III went to his parents' room and woke them up. Dick hopped into his stolen Toyota and took off, but not before James Jr. saw the make and model of the car and a partial license plate. But this didn't stop Dick from targeting another person that night. 30-year-old Bill Cairns was with his fiancée, 29-year-old Inez Erickson. He shot Bill 3 times with his .25 caliber handgun while he was asleep, then focused on Inez. He told her that he was the Night Stalker. He demanded that she tell him that she loves Satan, and then told her to tell people that the Night Stalker was there. During that summer that this all happened, temperatures were high. People were forced to keep their windows closed even with the heat because of Dick. Those were all of the victims of his crime. Some survived, some didn't. But he wouldn't be out stalking the nights for long, because the hunt was on. After the Pan murder, Dick ended up getting rid of his Avia shoes by throwing them over the side of a bridge. The reason being, those shoes were rare. In fact, only 1 pair had been sold in LA, and that was to Dick himself, which police were keeping from the press, as this was their best leads besides some fingerprints. But the mayor of San Francisco nearly screwed everything up. Dianne Feinstein had taken over the job of mayor on November 27, 1978, after George Moscone and Harvey Milk were assassinated by Dan White. I'm going to cover this case sooner or later, but she had a long tenure as mayor. She decided to hold a press conference about Dick's crimes, where she told the press about the shoe, which was dumb. While they had fingerprints, they were not enough to pin them on one person. The shoes were, and Dick happened to be watching, so he did what any criminal would do: get rid of the evidence that could lead to prison time. So Feinstein is a complete moron and almost caused this to be an unsolved crime. Inez Erickson was able to give a detailed description of Dick to police. Added on to that, the Toyota that he had been driving was located and his fingerprint was discovered. Add on to that, Dick's prints were in the system, and the system had just been updated, so they were able to link him to the stolen car as well as Inez's assault. On August 29, 1985, the police released Dick's mugshot to the media. So where was Dickie Boy at this time? In Tucson, visiting his brother. When he came back to LA by bus, he had been unaware that his mugshot was all over the place. So when he returned, he was in for a surprise. He made it to an East LA convenience store, where a group of elderly Hispanic women immediately noticed him and began screaming El Matador at him, which I thought El Matador meant bullfighter, but apparently means the killer. But to be fair, I failed Spanish. But this is when he noticed that he was on every paper and tried to flee, and he didn't get very far. After trying to carjack someone, he was pulled out. He tried to continue running, but he was pursued into Boyle Heights by 10 very angry people. The can of whoop-ass they opened up on him would make Stone Cold proud. He was taken into custody after getting the ass whooping that this jackoff deserved. I am not going to go over the full trial, just the highlights. You know, the stuff people saw. During the jury selection on July 22nd, 1988, he showed up with a pentagram drawn on his hand and screamed "Hail Satan." This is where we get the picture of him with his hand up. On September 20th, 1988, he was convicted and sentenced to death in the gas chamber, which he would state, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." Too bad California abolished the death penalty. He ended up serving life in prison. There are people out there who look at Dick like he is a sexy man. They are weird. And this is coming from someone who uses an anthropomorphic fox to do YouTube videos. The guy had rotting teeth. He stunk. He had bad breath. That is sexy? This guy was far from attractive. He was a cokehead, mostly homeless, living in hotel rooms, showered rarely. What those people are seeing are the images from court where he looks semi-presentable. But even then, is he? He liked the idea of Satan, but he knew jack shit about the occult and Satanism. He just liked the power he got from invoking Satan's name. He did do some interviews, but I really don't want to hear his voice. If you can't tell, I have nothing but disdain for this man. He ended up dying from B-cell lymphoma on June 7, 2003. I hope when he got to hell, Satan decided the best torture was to make him listen to Justin Bieber's music while getting pineapples shoved up his ass. These events happened during the Satanic Panic. He wasn't the only serial killer to strike during the 80s when the panic was at its height, but he was the poster child. He was the boogeyman who could be pointed to as evidence that satanic rituals were happening, when really he was nothing more than a creepy little boy who thought by saying that he was in league with Satan that it would give him power. He was called many names: the Valley Intruder, the Break-In Killer, and the Night Stalker. But Dick Ramirez was a man who should be forgotten. Instead, we should remember his victims. On December 9th, part 3 of the Satanic Panic, the conclusion to this trilogy, where we look at how the media stoked the flames, musicians being targeted for their music, more preschool trials, and how this panic has evolved over time into Pizzagate and QAnon.